walk me through, why did you move to Japan?
Okay. All right. So long story short, because it is a very long story, a long convoluted story, but I started off as a Taekwondo player.
Okay.
When I was in high school, Taekwondo was the first thing I was ever good at.
Okay.
And, by the time when I was 15, I became a junior Olympic state champion for Michigan. I did that 6 days after I got my black belt. So,
and that's where you're from. You're from Michigan.
I'm from Michigan, Detroit.
Hey, Detroit sweater in Japan.
You know what I'm saying? I got a rep. So. So I had a lot of really big aspirations for what I wanted to do with Taekwondo, because it was the first thing I was ever good at, so I really wanted to try and go to the Olympics. So I went to Korea. I started training in Korea. I spent three years training in Korea.
Okay.
And then I was going back and forth to the States, and I won a few non-Olympic qualifying national championships, but nothing that would, that would qualify me for the Olympics. So by the time I was about 25, I had lived in Korea for several years. I had also, because I had exhausted all of my living options in Korea, because I was going via university study abroad programs, I literally took every single class you could take in Korea. And they're like, there's no more classes for you to take there.
Really? So, they're like, the curriculum is that limited?
Yeah, just because usually people do one study abroad. I did like 4, right? And they're like, you've taken all the classes in Korea. And I was like, all right, well, what's the next closest country? And then they're like, Hong Kong. You can study abroad in Hong Kong, but you got to be a business major. And I was like, all right. So I added a business minor to my degree, and then just went to Hong Kong, studied in Hong Kong, taught English, saved up money to go back to Korea again.
Really?
And I'd been doing that for years, right? So by the time I finished school, I had all this living experience in Asia. I spoke Korean. I lived in Hong Kong, and I had a lot of high-level martial arts experience, but I hadn't gone to where I really wanted to go with Taekwondo.
Okay.
So then I thought, all right, well, if I'm really, really going to do this Olympic thing, then this means from now, probably until I'm like 30, my life is only ever going to be Taekwondo. And that's all.
Okay.
Granted, I love Taekwondo. I still love Taekwondo. I have a dojo here in Tokyo as well.
That's what's up. That's what's up.
But at that point, because I had been traveling, I started seeing what the rest of the world was like.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And I started living in foreign cultures. And, aside from living in Hong Kong and living in Korea, I was an international volunteer in Thailand. Like, I lived in a Buddhist temple for a few months and was for a few weeks, and was helping the abbots with community service work. And I started seeing how big the world was. And I thought, when I'm 30, do I really only want to know Taekwondo when there's so much world out there?
Yeah.
And the answer ended up being no. I loved it. I knew I was always going to do it. But, there was so much more world that I wanted to see. So I thought, all right, well, this means I need to find a new way. So, I've lived in China and I lived in Japan. I've lived in China, I've lived in Korea.
Okay.
I think it just makes sense for me to go to Japan. And at the time, my brother was studying abroad in Japan because he. So
you guys are all over the place. The whole family's traveling.
Yeah, kind of.
Do your parents even know where you're at anymore? What's happening?
Yeah, they at this point both my folks are gone, unfortunately.
Oh, but I'm sorry to hear that.
No, it is what it is. It's life, know. But at the time, my brother was in Japan. My older sister was studying in London. So I was interested in Japan because he liked it. And I was like, I wonder why he likes it so much. So then I went there and then I saw it. And then I saw Tokyo and I was like, I just got to live here. I just got to live in this place.
Was it the ramen? Was it the ramen?
Ramen was actually the first Japanese food that I had. It was the very first
I would
one.
imagine it's everywhere. I went to Japan and I spent a decent amount of time there, obviously not as much as you, but there's a tremendous amount of ramen, and the way that it's served is a very unique experience. But obviously that's not the only reason to go to Japan, ladies and gentlemen. But I think that was one of the things that I remember was the ramen.
Yeah, it's funny because the first Japanese friend that I met, he said, why don't we go out for ramen? Because at the time I was still in Korea,
Yeah.
And then my visa expired. I had to renew my visa, so I had to take a trip to Japan. So I took a boat from Korea to Japan because I was just broke, and that's all I could afford was a boat. So I took a boat.
Did you have one of those like Korean hats while on the boat?
I wish that I did.
I'm just picturing that.
I took this boat, and I was on this boat, and there's this Japanese dude sitting next to me, and he's like, "Yeah, we've been on this boat for 12 hours, and you haven't eaten anything like at all. I mean, do you want to go for ramen after this?" And I was like, "Honestly, I would love to because I'm starving."
Why didn't you eat for 12 hours?
Because I was broke. You know, I mean, like basically at the time, all I was doing was training, which means that I wasn't working, you know, or I was working just enough to feed myself.
Apparently not.
Yeah. So
like you're sitting here like 12 hours, no food because you're broke. Like that's kind of significant.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, okay. Here's one of the things about going to the Olympics that people don't know is that it's extremely expensive.
Yeah.
You know, people, I mean, you think it's just all about being talented, but it's not about talented. It's about having the money and the resources.
You gotta have sponsorship.
And I didn't know that. And I had zero sponsorships. So I was just bootstrapping everything myself.
Yeah.
And then my visa just ran out. And then I was like, all right, well, damn, I got to get a new visa. So this is just what I got to do. So I took a train down to the southern tip of Korea and then just took a boat. And then I met this Japanese dude and he's like, I haven't seen you eat anything for 12 hours. So I'm like, So then he's like, why don't we go off for ramen? And then at the time, I was thinking ramen is like cup noodle. You know what I'm saying? Like I never had real ramen. I'm like, why would anybody want to go to a cup noodle restaurant?
Yeah. That's college. That's
like,
college food. You know
exactly.
what I mean?
Real ramen. Took me out for real ramen. It was fantastic. And it was a very cool and awesome experience. I mean, that guy, he's still a friend of mine to this day. He lives in Nara. He's just a high school teacher now. Okay. You know, but he's still one of my boys to this day. Just from that experience, right? So my first experience with ramen was amazing.
So you moved to Japan mainly for your. I want to make sure I'm saying it right because most people say Taekwondo, but I'm noticing you're saying it differently. Is that because like the Japanese enunciation of Taekwondo is what?
Yeah,
Taekwondo.
Actually, it's Korean. It's Taekwondo.
Taekwondo. So for all those who are listening, it's not Taekwondo. Stop saying Taekwondo. It's
Taekwondo.
Taekwondo. All right, got it. I'm learning. I like it.